here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be a turn of bassist and composer Andy Prince, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love and poetry. Has played in a lot of bands as the bass guitarist and also has various solo projects on. I will give you a link to his SoundCloud page, but this is the interview, so after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Andy, it's over to you.
Multiple ones in a way. I think I had a sequence of them. The first record I bought, I was born in '54, so my first record was the Beatles' Twist and Shout EP.
Yes.
And growing up in the Northwest, I guess we all wanted to be Beatles, basically. And my father was a massive Sinatra fan. Mother was into classical music, and I actually joined the church choir because I just wanted to do something musical.
Right.
So from quite an early age, I'd been interested in music. And I think probably one of the seminal influences for me was my Uncle Rick, who was a merchant seaman. And he was a country musician, and he was the first person I ever saw playing a guitar in real life.
Yes.
So that was really my initiation into the musical world.
That would have been a nice moment, wouldn't it, really? Because actually I sort of come from the kind of East Anglian countryside where people didn't seem to play in bands or play musical instruments. I don't know what happened, but it was kind of just a very rural sort of working class lifestyle. And sport was kind of mostly the thing that people did apart from work 6 days a week. So I think it was music didn't really it wasn't in the air, so to speak, and there wasn't that opportunity to see people. So when you were kind of, obviously you were old enough during the 60s to slightly have an awareness of the musical change happening, with things like, like you said, Twist and Shout. But then did you sort of 67, 68, did you sort of get that feel, within... in the air of kind of the summer of love and sort of the spirit that was kind of going to be Woodstock before it all slightly went sour?
Yeah, it's it actually got me at a quite an important age, as I was 12 in the summer of love. So I was just discovering clothes, music, girls, the whole, all of it.
Yes.
So yes, it was very influential. And furthermore, my dad's elder sister married a US airman at the end of World War II. And so I have an older American cousin. And in 1968, he sent me 2 LPs. He sent me the Jefferson Airplane, Crown of Creation, and Iron Butterfly, Inagada Davida. And so I was 13 listening to this stuff as well. So it awakened a lifelong love of West Coast American psychedelia too.
Yes, I could imagine. That was quite nice, actually, especially the Jefferson Airplane. Did you, were you drawn to the kind of the hippie culture at that stage? Were you, because I was just saying that because I was listening to some of the music you have on SoundCloud, and there was a kind of element of kind of holistic love and New Age, kind of a certain quality. So I just wondered if you really were kind of drawn to that kind of lifestyle and the world that was kind of Timothy Leary's Tune In, Turn On, Drop Out and such like.
Yeah, very much so. And it remains a big influence. I think a lot of people who got into punk of my age group have been proto-hippies beforehand, and perhaps slightly too young to be fully into it, but it had that same sort of ethos and the same influences.
Yes. So when did you go to your first concert? When was your first kind of live experience?
Oh, quite powerful one. It was my first proper gig. I was 15. It was Pink Floyd in 1969 at Liverpool Empire. So it was just post Syd Barrett, but during the Sourceful of Secrets era.
Yes. So that would sort of certainly turn off. Yes, because in the last couple of weeks I did an interview with both Terry Reid and Linda Lewis, who was obviously of that kind of the world. And it was kind of drawn on the fact that I've always loved Terry Reid, and he's on that famous Glastonbury film from probably 71 where he singing away. Alan White is on drums from Yes, who sadly passed away. And then Linda comes in, doesn't she, and does her amazing vocal. Yeah. And yes, it was just interesting. So did you go to that world that was kind of the festival, kind of 3-day love fest during the 70s?
I never did during that period. Strangely enough, a lot of my friends did. Some was the Grateful Dead at Bickershaw and so on, but I never went. I didn't actually go to any festivals until the 80s for some strange reason.
Right, the Bickershaw one that was organised by Jeremy Beadle, wasn't it?
I didn't know that. That's quite interesting.
And I know someone who went and they said it was horrendous, the mud. But Jeremy Beadle, it was kind of one of those ones that, I have to say I had to Google that and just check the facts. But it was like his one attempt to put a festival on, which I don't think he ever wanted to do it again. So then when did you get your first musical instrument?
Again, I had a guitar probably from about the age of 12. I bought an electric guitar from a newsagent down the road where I lived. Classic case, put it under the bed and forgot about it for 6 months, but it kept preying on my mind, and finally got it out. But it wasn't until really I got to the age of 15 when I realised that I actually wanted to go for a bass. That was what I was drawn to. I was drawn to the deep sounds.
Yes.
So that was my first proper instrument, getting a bass guitar.
Yeah. And did you see any particular bassist that you thought, that's me, like John Entwistle?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously with having grown up with the Beatles, it was McCartney who was my first bass influence. Then subsequently, obviously, I started listening to, because of the Jeff Snare playing thing, I was really interested in Jack Cassidy, listening to Jack Bruce, all of the great players from that era, Entwistle, Jack Bruce, Andy Fraser, because there were a lot of the bass suddenly started to come to the fore during the late 60s.
Yes, and I guess you also had that incredible, I don't know, it was Ziggy, David Bowie, his Ziggy Stardust period of Trevor Bolder.
And Trevor Bolder, again, yeah. And again, I think that was quite a big influence on me, the whole Ziggy Stardust thing. So I had a bad car crash when I was 19, and my dad bought me the Ziggy Stardust cassette to listen to in hospital, along with Live Yes.
Right.
So there was a kind of interesting blend there, but I really got into Chris Squire at that point.
I was going to say, yes, with Chris Squire came, because I sort of had that kind of experience of, as I sort of mentioned, I was kind of a bit of an indie kid during the 80s, but I had an older brother who was 7 years older, and in the 70s, he got really into prog rock. So, Yes and Genesis were the kind of main ones, and then it was, Barclay James Harvest, Wishbone Ash, and then a kind of mix of Black Sabbath and Deep Purple. So, but 2 albums he had in the sort of that period just before the mid-70s was Goodbye Yellow Brick Road and Sgt. Pepper, which at the time just seemed like, oh, these are good albums. They didn't have any kind of cultural significance at that point because they were just around, and the Beatles, even though they'd only just broken up, when you think about it, it felt like they were from a completely different age and totally different point of our time. So when did you start sort of thinking you were going to sort of follow music even more than just being a keen fan during the sort of 70s?
Well, we had a school band, and in fact, I'm actually currently playing in one of my old teenage bandmates' bands up in the north as a depth player. But yeah, we had a school band, so I must be about 16 or so when that happened, 15, 16. And then I realised that I was trying to be a sort of pale imitation of Pink Floyd. Wasn't going to work. And if I was going to take it seriously, I'm going to have to follow the same routes that all my influences had followed, which is basically joining a cover band and actually learning how to construct a bass part and basically, just initially copying other players.
Yes. So during the 70s, did you mentioned there'd been glam, there was the West Coast sound, then obviously 76, 77 punk comes along. Did you leave school when you were 16?
Yes, I did.
So then was music a side hustle at this stage, or had you managed to sort of...
kind of, well, it was a classic route, actually. I went to art school and dropped out and joined a band after the first year.
Has to be done.
Yeah,
So then, because there was a few musicians, Lemmy being one, and David Bowie. I mean, there's more than just those two.
Yeah.
But there was like, they were just going to stick with music, roughly. Most people go, oh, I'm really into music, actually, but it's not going to pay, so I'll get a job, and then one day I'll try and do the two. Did you manage to sort of just stick with music at that stage during the 70s?
As probably when I was about 19, I turned pro because I was playing with a cover band, but we were out every night of the week and managing to live on those proceeds.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, I was kind of lucky. In the Northwest, though, there was such a network. There were gigs everywhere, all the old working men's clubs and so on. You know, there were, at one point, there was something like 300 bands just in Newcastle.
Blimey, that's extraordinary. That is just amazing.
There was a big explosion of it.
I know Lemmy was in the Rockin' Vickers, wasn't he? Which was, I've never heard of them, but I have heard of the name, but I've never heard the band. I don't know if they ever recorded anything in the studio. But then what happened then to you in 76, 77? Did punk give you a bit of a jolt, electric shock?
Yeah, it coincided with me moving south. And from mid-76 onwards, I just did loads of auditions in London with pretty much any kind of music. I was just trying to find my feet in the big smoke, as it were.
Yes.
And so basically punk. I can remember the very first time I actually saw a punk. I went out. I used to go out quite a lot, just go to gigs of an evening just to see what was happening. And I was up in Islington in the Hope and Anchor, and I saw this guy with a kind of rough cut David Bowie haircut, winkle pickers, and a 60s suit. And I thought, this looks kind of cool. And that was my first sighting that I remember.
Yes.
And of course, it just pretty much exploded after that.
So how were you sort of hustling in London at that stage? Did you start sort of playing with people? Or did you start doing session work?
I did a lot of auditions. And I joined a band called Rikki in the Last Days of Earth, which is a bit of a cumbersome name. And they were much reviled at the time for actually having a synthesizer in the band. Yeah. But 2 or 3 years on, suddenly that became all the rage.
Yes.
Kind of ahead of its time.
And then we got 79. Margaret Thatcher gets in, this kind of great cultural change. The punk period, punk had slightly gone sort of sour. Then the post-punk period with bands like Magazine and Gang of Four. Yeah. And then, there was, this is quite a simplistic kind of view, isn't there? Yeah. And then you got the kind of new romantic, that kind of electronic scene with synthesizer. And then 83 is kind of, for me, one of the great moments with the Smiths appearing. So how do you navigate the kind of 80s? Because often what I found doing this show is that musicians who've been in one decade or one period find it slightly difficult to make that change. So how did you, navigate through this period?
I kind of adapted. I'd seen Peter Gabriel in 1978, and his bass player, Tony Levin, was playing this amazing instrument called a Chapman stick. And I just thought, well, I've never seen anything like this or heard anything like it. I've got to get one. I think, I can't remember whether it probably been the mid-80s when I got hold of that. But 1981, it's chronologically now. It was around about 1981, I sort of branched out. I joined a band called Random Hold, which was basically synth-based. Mm-hmm. And they were signed to the same management company as Peter Gabriel. Which was quite an interesting coincidence because of that, I got to go to Gabriel's studio in Bath, where I actually saw this Chapman stick instrument in the flesh for the first time. Had a little poke at it, and I thought, well, there's no way I can work. I don't know how this thing works at all.
Yes.
And I did very, very briefly played with Toyah at that period as well. Did one telly show and some demos. Didn't get on with the management, unfortunately, which is a shame because I didn't fall out with her.
Yeah.
But I lost that gig. Perhaps
because at that point she'd probably had her big single, hadn't she? Sort of.
It was just prior to that. It was post the Sheep Farming in Barnet album.
So had she done It's a Mystery and Dance?
No, it was prior to that.
Cheesy queasy.
So I actually did the demos for Angels and Demons and a few other songs, which made it onto that album, I think.
Oh, wow. My God, there you go, yeah. Toyah. You could have been there.
Yeah, I know.
Management, tricky. How come the management didn't love you?
The short story is they wanted to change the drummer, and the new drummer would only work with a specific bass player, so I had to go as well.
Oh, blimey. That's not good. So then after post-Toyah, then what happens?
So I went through a kind of period of doing the odd session, plus I was working at Marcus Music Studio in Westbourne Grove, just doing the reception job there, doing night reception, which was great in a way because I got to meet, I met Chris Squire, I met Tony Levin, did quite a few odd sessions through just happening to be there and playing the bass. It was, and Marcus has stayed a lifelong friend, although he's retired now and no longer has the studio.
Yes. So then, as the 80s progressed, what's your next musical moment?
Next moment after that was 1985 or 6. Dave Parsons from Sham and I, it was 85 actually, Dave Parsons from Sham and I got a band together with the ex-Sham drummer, Rick Goldstein.
Right.
And a singer, Kevin. Tried to get a kind of indie band together. Did about a year with that. Wasn't working for me, and I left. They got another bass player. And then in late 86, it would have been Christmas 86.
Yes.
I joined, Dave asked me if I'd like to join Sham 69, who were reforming, because the original bass player didn't want to do it at that point. And I said, well, yeah.
Do it. That's what they say. But yes. And what was that like? Because musically, that scene, again, I sort of found that by 83, I know I always gone about it, but, the Smiths appeared, this kind of indie world, and that kind of moment where, you got all those bands like the Triffids and the Go-Betweens and the June Brides. There was suddenly a real scene like that. And I know there was that, on the other side, you had the Trevor Horn production sound, which is, like, I suppose, ABC and Frankie, and you had that Dire Straits and Tina Turner. So I find musically things had really kind of, you were on one camp or the other, roughly. So what was it like, sort of going into a band that had been so kind of well known, in the 70s?
It was quite curious because they'd wanted to progress, if you like. The point when I was with them, it wasn't just straight punk rock. Rather like the Clash ended up with London Calling, where they become a band basically more eclectic. That's that attracted me. I thought, well, this is good. I can be creative in this. And I got to see the world a bit as well, obviously. We did a tour of America, went to Japan, all around Europe.
And was Jimmy at that stage, because was this the point where he started doing odd dancing on stage?
It was post that. He'd done, yes, I can remember, because I remember the Riverside Arts Show thing that he did. Yes. And I think it was Dancing to the Stranglers, if I remember rightly.
Yes. And did you get to do a new album with him?
Yeah, I did 2 albums, one called Volunteer and another one called Information Libre. Both which I thought were great albums, actually. Funnily enough, I've just been logging them onto my PPL account because I realised that I might be owed some royalties from that. So I thought I'd better check it out.
Yes, absolutely. And what was the process like of recording, like, the first album, with them, Volunteer?
That was great. We did it at Maison Rouge in Fulham. I thoroughly enjoyed that. It was a great band. We had a great drummer, Ian Whitewood. At that point, Tony Bick was on keyboards and Jimmy on vocal, of course, Dave Parsons on guitar. And then the second album we did, Tony had left and a female keyboard player joined, Patricia Bastian. That album was done at the Mill in Berkshire, and the producer was guy Stuart Epps. Now, he'd worked with Jimmy Page, George Harrison, and all sorts. So that, for me, that was the one where the sound kind of matured.
Yes. And that's because you start with the Doors classic Break On Through. What was the kind of, was that a kind of one that the band wanted to do, or Jimmy at this stage?
I think it was consensual, really. I mean, it may have been Jimmy that suggested it initially, but we just felt, yes, let's go for it. I mean, I tried to persuade them to do If 6 Was 9 as well, but we had a bit of a run through, but it didn't work.
Yes, a bit of a. I mean, what was the crowd like coming to see the band at that stage? Were they kind of old punks or people who were curious to discover them for the first time?
It was a very interesting mix. There were old punks, new people, and unfortunately at that point there was a hard right neo-Nazi lot came along occasionally as well, which we had quite a bit of trouble with them from time to time.
Yes, I would imagine. It was because it's kind of weird, because I know when the BBC did their kind of, I guess it was on BBC4, weren't they? The Best of Punk, or Punk at the BBC, and seeing them performing, If the Kids Are United, it's a strange song. Did you actually perform that live yourself?
Yeah. And
what was it like? Because it's such a strange number, isn't it? When, especially as you get older and you watch it or listen to it, it's like, there's some flaws in that. There's some flaws in that sentiment, aren't there?
In a sense, yes, but at the same time, I think, like a lot of musicians, I still think of myself as 18. It's certainly in my head, anyway.
Yes, because that was, again, 91's a bit of a I mean, it's such a tricky period because a lot of bands kind of start to split. I suppose what I found doing this show is most bands have a 5-year narrative, especially in the 80s, they'd have that 12-month honeymoon period. They get a single out, John Peel played it, they get John Peel session, things looking good. The first album, everyone's slightly happy, lots of touring around in the transit van, going to all the art centres and smallish clubs around the UK. Because the UK is great, isn't it? Because every town and city has a alternative night on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So, most people get a book. The second album, things are quite good, the band are getting the sound together, but there's a bit of friction in the band. There's a sort of a bit of a lack of money. And then the other thing is there's often every few years, every 5, say, there's a new musical kind of wave that starts, a new wave of 16-year-olds who come along. They want their sound. And I suppose by the late 80s, you got that kind of ecstasy world, and, people wanted the Stone Roses and the Happy Mondays and, Primal Scream. So there was that kind of movement. And then you had the Seattle grunge scene that started to come over with Kurt Cobain and Nevermind. So what was it like for you as a musician, sort of having seeing that kind of happen? I just wondered what it would be, when you're aware of this new sound here and there's another new sound over there.
I tend to, if there's something of note, I will absorb it and take an influence from it, definitely. I mean, I changed tack with Sham. I actually left because they wanted to concentrate on doing the older material. And for me, then that, I mean, I'm still friends with them. There's, I've known them since before I joined the band. I've known Jimmy and Dave since 1976. So, it's I respect what they're doing, but it wasn't for me. I wanted to have a creative input, and I left them and had a bit of a fallow period for a couple of years, and then got really into doing the Chapman stick. I went on a few courses. Studying with a superb musician called Guillermo Cides, who's from Argentina. And I went to a seminar in Catalonia, was the first one. I went to one in Mallorca and one into Amsterdam as well, where I was studying this instrument, basically.
Yes.
Which also had a knock-on effect on my bass playing too, because it basically increased the dexterity of both my hands. And I'd always played with a pick on the bass before, and I got into playing fingerstyle, listening to lots of Jameson, that kind of thing, lots of Motown. So it was kind of backtracking in a way that I wanted to revise the bass. That's what happened. Yes. So I ended up joining a jam band then in the in the mid to late 90s.
Is this the Magic Mushroom Band?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So when during the 80s and a bit of the 90s, I was quite into the alternative traveling community,
Right. Yeah.
Free festivals and stuff. And there was, obviously the Osric Tentacles. There was lots of squat sort of bass bands like this going around, like the Seven Kevins and such people. Were you kind of doing more freeform kind of rock out jazz fusion numbers?
Within a framework, yeah. We did. We used to just get together for a jam every week in the local community centre. But we ended up playing at Glastonbury and various other festivals during that period.
Yes.
And then the main two from that band, Gary and Kim, emigrated to Australia. Jim, the drummer, and the keyboard player, and I decided to get a jam band together, but doing rave music. So we were basically doing improvised rave music. And I was using the Chapman stick as a kind of super bass.
Yes.
And that was called the Three Antennas.
Blimey. So just kind of for those people who might not have come across it, could you explain where the Chapman stick comes from and how it kind of was kind of part of our musical sonic experience?
Okay. It was basically the late Emmett Chapman, who only passed away a year or so ago. He'd been inspired by Jimi Hendrix doing all that stuff with one hand and had the brainwave of having an instrument with two sets of strings, so both hands could do that. And he made various prototypes in the late 60s. And I think the first production model came out in the 70s. And it was, again, back to Tony Levin, who I first saw playing one. But yeah, the principle of it is it's the original is 10 strings, 5 bass, 5 treble, and you play it by tapping the strings onto the fret rather than strumming.
Right.
So it effectively like a keyboard in a sense in the way it's manipulated, but it just opened up whole multi-layered stuff for me. And although I'd initially seen Levin using it as a kind of super bass, the more I studied it, the more I realized it was more like a kind of 21st century harp or something, where you could perhaps do something a bit more expansive. And I've been a massive fan of Ralph Vaughan Williams, and so that inspired me to start going in a completely different direction in terms of composition, and try and do some neoclassical music of my own on it.
Right, blimey, the Lark Ascending.
Yeah, I know. I watched the performance of that the other night in the original setting, for the original arrangement for piano and violin. It moved me to tears. It was magical.
Yes. Did you start going through sort of a bit of a spiritual phase, with this kind of the 90s? Was this kind of a change in your sort of path in life? I kind of had a spiritual background in a way, in that I was brought up in the C of E. I was a choir boy. Interesting. My dad was a Catholic, mum was a Protestant, so I had that interesting mix there. And like all good Catholic boys, my dad was interested in the occult. So I was kind of interested. He'd seen Buddhists in India when he did his national service. So did you get into the world of ley lines and Arthurian legends? And
yeah, looked at it. I wouldn't say I was obsessed with it, but it's part of the picture.
Yes. Did you get into the rave culture as well, with such people as Astralasia and William Walbert and people like that?
Well, yeah, because Astralasia were originally an offshoot from the Magic Mushroom Band anyway. So I actually knew several of the members of that.
Right. So you sort of veered into going to raves at this stage.
Went to the odd one. Wasn't my big. I'm not a great hedonist, to be honest with you. So it wasn't really my thing. I've been to a few I've been to a few interesting events of that nature, but I never went to one of the great big ones.
No, I know. I'm not good at late nights myself. No. So when did you sort of, how did your 90s then progress at this stage?
We carried on with that band, and when that fizzled out, I just carried on doing the Chapman stick and started basically what I wanted to do with that. One of the best ways of learning an instrument is jamming with people. And the other good way is just going out and playing live and having done with it. So I did a lot of open mics and that kind of thing.
Yes. And when did you start to work with, because you've got, some work with Anthea Needs, haven't you?
Yeah.
Is this quite a recent project, like as in 10 years ago?
Well, I met Anthea on that open mic circuit. I think, if I remember rightly, I'd seen her, the very first time I saw her, she was in a duo with her husband of the time. And that was at the local arts centre. They were doing kind of rockabilly stuff as a duo. And I just got chatting, made friends. And she was doing a solo album. This would have been 2010.
Yes.
And she asked me to play bass on it. And I hadn't been playing bass for ages. I'd just been concentrating on the Chapman stick. But I got out my old Fender Jazz and went along to the studio, and we really hit it off. So, she'd actually recorded some of the tracks with another bass player and liked what I was doing better. So, what these things happen sometimes. So I ended up playing bass on the whole album in the end.
Yes. Is that work now been and done, or are you still working together?
No, it's quite a story actually in its own. We then decided that it had worked so well we should form a duo, and so we did. I had an acoustic bass. We started just going out gigging and around Glastonbury and places anywhere we could, really. And we started getting into the festival scene. She was quite good at getting gigs, so I was quite happy to go on along with that.
Yes.
And then we got a gig at Glastonbury Festival, and that would have been 2013. That was fabulous. We became a couple during this period and got married. And for our wedding, we got a super group together, and we actually played Glastonbury. But we had Brian Gulland out of Griffin. We had Matt Tweed, the bass player from Martha Tilston's band. My old friend Dave Buckley on drums, who I'd been in a band with as a teenager. And obviously I was playing bass, Anthea on guitar and vocals. And so we did Glastonbury again in 2014. So that was quite special.
Fantastic.
We did 2 albums together, Pen Hail and Love Revolution. And then sadly drifted apart and got divorced in 2017.
Oh, because the songs you did together, they were beautiful. I've listened to them on SoundCloud and I think, oh yes, I've come across.
Well, thank you.
These are kind of amazing. When did your next musical kind of the Sky Diamonds? Was this kind of post that project?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I was down in Cornwall, saying goodbye to Anthea's folks, went to stay with them for a week or so, and just, so because it's a family, and when you have a divorce, obviously it's quite cataclysmic in some ways because you're losing an extended family effectively. I went and stayed with them, and I noticed that Rosie Cunningham was wanting to get a Beatles cover band together, and I said, well, I'm your man. I'll do the bass. And that's roughly how that came about. And her dad was doing the drums, Mark Cunningham, a lovely fella, a fabulous musician in his own right, and a well-respected journalist too. So it was a really nice thing to get together with them. Although Rosie's now been so busy with her solo stuff, we've not actually done anything since prior to the pandemic.
Yes. So how did you cope with the last couple of years? Because obviously,
practiced a lot. I did a few videos at home of my own Chapman stick stuff, very cursory ones. I didn't go mad on it because I'm a firm believer. Yes, we are talking online here, but I'm a firm believer that the real action takes place face to face.
Yes. Well, I sort of, from talking to a lot of musicians, it is kind of just playing live a lot to really learn what works and what doesn't work. Absolutely. And virtually, I think every musician has that experience. You just need to put in the hours and the time. And I mean, the Beatles is the famous one with the Cavern and also Hamburg as well. But a lot of the kind of smaller indie bands, it was just like playing support and just going around the circuit and slowly getting further and further up the pecking order. But it was just seeing, being able to sort of work out if you really did want to do this thing or not. And yes, it was kind of facing the crowd and also learning how to set up your gear and then sort of return at sort of 4 o'clock in the morning, unloading at the back of a transit van in wintertime. But it made people, either say, I really want this thing, or I really not that sure about this anymore. I might go and get a day job. So you've always definitely stuck with music, haven't you?
Yeah.
Which is quite amazing.
I've done backup jobs, obviously. I've done decorating work and so on over the years, but which I don't particularly mind, actually. I just like to be active.
Yes. And what sort of musical projects have you got lined up sort of for the coming kind of 12 months?
I've been quite busy since the pandemic. Obviously, I've just thought, right, I'm going to say yes to everything.
Yes.
Which is perhaps not the wisest move because I've been tiring myself out. But I've been recording with my old bandmate, Susan Raven, from the Random Hold days. She's been what I would call prog folk. So she's got a lovely album out called Charioteer, which I played bass on. Been recording and going to be doing more recording with her later on in the year. It's been an ongoing project for her subsequent album. It's not funished yet.
Yes.
I've been depping with my friend's cover band up in the Northwest called the Pink Pumps. And funnily enough, they're doing a lot of Smiths, Stone Roses, that kind of thing, which I'm loving.
Fantastic.
Playing those kind of songs.
So have you had to learn the parts of Andy Rourke?
Yep. I'm quite anal with if there's a nice bass line in a song, I will learn it exactly. I mean, obviously, it's going to sound like me in the end, but I will learn every nuance of it.
Yes,
to do it justice.
And is it easy? I mean, I know it's kind of interesting. Often drummers, there's a particular, a drummer has such a big impact on a band. How does kind of filling in with the bass, how does that impact with a band?
Well, I think the bass is kind of like the fulcrum in a way. It's the bridge between rhythm and melody. And but again, like Tony Levin, you can do lovely counter melodies without losing the rhythmic aspect of it.
Yes.
So I think it's important. A bass player's got to have a superb sense of timing, first and foremost.
But when you sort of do the Andy Rourke numbers, realizing that he was quite young at the time, do you think yes, he was a good bass player, or he was all right for his age?
No, I think I don't think age comes into it in a way. I think you're either good or you're not, and you just get better at being what you do over time. But yes, no, his bass lines are super.
Yes,
I really enjoyed. Particularly, we're doing "There Is a Light That Never Goes Out."
My God, that's a favourite song.
It's just, and it goes down a storm every time we do it, and I've loved playing that.
Yeah,
really hit the groove on it.
Yes, I they were kind of my band of the 80s, I suppose.
Right.
I mean, so they do have a huge impact on my life. And yes, and then after that, is it just kind of more the same, sort of playing whoever says, asks you along?
Well, sort of, yeah. I'm also rehearsing with a guy called Aaron Cillier for a one-off prog gig at Wokingham Festival. His parents have got a band called Sprig and Mist, which is kind of pagan prog folk again, I guess. So weirdly enough, the drummer is a guy called Scott Hunter, and it turned out he was actually in a band with Anthea years ago.
My God, it's all
going full circle, yeah.
Has pagan sort of, what's it, prog folk, has that become a bigger kind of genre than it used to be?
I think, in a way, the hippie movement has been kind of infiltrated by this new age pagan bunch of philosophies.
Right.
I mean, I'm old school. I just think about it should be about love and peace, full stop.
Yes.
Anything else is overcomplicating it.
Very.
In my opinion.
Because it's kind of interesting because some of it gets a little bit, I don't know, slightly politically dodgy, doesn't it? Some of the, it kind of veers into some right-wing philosophy as well at times, which can be a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit like, do you know what you're saying, or do you know what it is you're alluding to at this point in the conversation? Which obviously people just get a bit more complicated, and you think, perhaps I'm not going to get too involved with these people. But I did sort of come across a musician who once kind of ended up with a neo-folk rock band, and it was like, and then it was like, yes, they were very close to the kind of the right, if not the far right as well. They had a big following in that world, and so it was quite strange. So have you ever sort of experienced kind of some uncomfortable moments like that?
Not personally, but I've obviously got or have had friends who've perhaps succumbed to that to an extent. I mean, obviously, with the Sham experience, I'm seriously anti-Nazi or anti-authoritarian, actually, if the truth be told.
Yes.
I think, a mature person should be able to go through their life and without causing any harm.
Yes.
And without imposing their views on other people.
This is true. Apart from being vegetarian, that's always good. But
yeah. Well, I've been vegan 32 years now, so I know what you're saying there.
So if you think, just when someone looks at their pet and sort of goes on about them and then eat meat, you think it's a bit strange. Yeah. But if you were to say something to your 16-year-old self, if you could have spent a bit of time with them and sort of given them any words of wisdom or advice, even if that person might have ignored you, is there anything that you would have or might have said to them?
It'll take longer than you think. I think, yes, probably if I met my 16-year-old self, we were jolly good talking to. But I think, yes, that it will take longer than you think, and growing up is a lifelong process.
Yes, and there's always a few more lessons to be learned,
Absolutely,
I guess. Yes. And are you still in love with music as much now as you were when you were young?
Probably more so. I think, Robert Miles said it, music was my first love, and he was kind of right.
Yes, dear old Robert Miles. There you go. Well, look, Andrew, thank you ever so much for this. This has been fantastic. And if you want, I can always send you the link, and you can always use it on your Facebook page if you
thank
care
you.
to.
That'd be lovely, yeah.
It's always fine to do that. Yeah. But thanks for your time. And
my pleasure.
Yeah, and I've really enjoyed listening to some of your work you did throughout the decades, actually. It's been fascinating. But yes, thanks again for this. This has been magic, and all the best for this summer and the winter.
Likewise. I've thoroughly enjoed chatting with you too, so I wish you all the best.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and I'll keep in touch. Okay, cheers.
Cool. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That was me in conversation with the bass player, Andy Prince, talking about his life in music. This has been the C86 Show. David Eastaugh. Have a great week. Stay safe.